Yeah, this is the second week of Advent, and 4 weeks, but we took 5 weeks. First week to kind of prelude this series and lead into it a little bit. But these 4 weeks, we're taking time to think about four distinct themes, and so very grateful for Daniel Parham leading us last week, and then he will lead us next week, and then we're going to kind of leapfrog each other back and forth. But before I dive more into that, because I'm going to say more about that as we go, let me open us with a word of prayer for our time. But before I do, any prayers that you would offer on your behalf or our behalf or someone else's behalf? Any brief prayer comments that we can share as we open together? If not, I'll just pray. Anyone? Silent prayers are good prayers. Let us pray together. Gracious and loving God, we do give thanks for time to be together, time to be gathered in this room in this way, because we are gathered for your purpose, which is to better understand you and to seek you and your light and your way for this world, to transform our minds and our spirits to more look like yours and be like yours. So in this season of Advent, may we seek your peace and wait for you in ways that embolden us to better be your people in the here and now. For all these who are gathered and those who cannot be, for this congregation and for this community we are a part of, we give you our thanks and ask your blessing and your presence that we would feel and know all the days of our life. It's in Christ's name that we pray. Amen. So, as I was mentioning, this is the season of Advent, which this year is from Sunday, November 30th, last week, till right to Christmas Eve. And then Christmas takes over. Christmas, we talked about 2 weeks ago, these distinct liturgical seasons. So now we're in the season of Advent, going through this journey. And so, very briefly, Advent, this 4 week period, so the 4 Sundays that precede Christmas, prepares people for Jesus Christ's birth at Christmas while also pointing ahead to his promised return. Some of us in our book group are also paying attention to the third coming of Jesus in the here and now, which is really meaningful. Each Sunday of the season traditionally will spotlight four themes that are connected to the four candles on the Advent wreath: hope, peace, joy, love, to invite reflection, prayer, expectant celebration. And so this is where we are. Last week was hope, or yakal, right, Daniel? Is that hope? Yeah. And then peace is this week. Joy is the third week. Anybody know why joy is a little bit different? The color up there. There are these traditions that go back to one expression of joy being celebrated as the third season being the one where we say, hang on, we're almost there, where a carnation was used to symbolize, I forget who it was that did that many years ago, to symbolize joy as the season of, hang on, it's coming, we're still going, we're not there yet, but they use these pink carnations to symbolize the Sunday of joy. And there are some other traditions around why joy is this kind of distinct candle that's different, because it's the one that helps us in our waiting to keep going. We get halfway through and it's like, hang on, joy is coming in the morning, we can keep going. Anyway, if you're curious, there's more traditions about that are interesting. But this is where we are. We're in these four themes. And so this week, we're going to spend some time thinking about peace. Next week, joy. The last week, love. One more primer for the conversation. Advent is more than a countdown to Christmas. We've had some interesting conversation in this room and in our book groups about the ways we count down to Christmas. I mentioned in the book group that when I was in Scotland a few weeks ago, they had big old boxes of Scotch whiskey Advent calendars where every day was a different little bottle of Scotch. That's one way you can celebrate Advent. But it's more than that. It isn't just this countdown to Christmas. It's a distinct way in which we embrace the way of Jesus, encourage hopeful waiting, courageous peacemaking, we're talking about today, resilient joy and self-giving love in our still suffering world. So there's meaning to this season. It's not just something to count down to Christmas. Advent also means living into it by practicing This is something we do. This is something we engage in. And so when we think about hope, when we think about peace, these are not just thoughts. These are not just feelings. These are verbs. These are actions. These are things we're engaging with. We partner with Jesus to bring peace on earth. And that's where we're going to spend our time today, is what are we talking about when we say partner with Jesus to bring peace on earth? So, second Sunday of Advent, the Sunday of peace. So very briefly, when I say peace, one of my favorite things to do is to do word association with people. So when I say peace, what do you think of? What comes to mind? Whether I'm talking about what I just said, peace on earth and Jesus, or I'm just saying the word peace. What's on your mind when I use that word?
Calm.
Calm?
Calmness.
Okay.
Tranquility.
Tranquility.
Harmony.
Comfort.
Harmony.
Harmony.
And I can't help seeing December 7th up right there and realizing a day not of peace.
Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor.
Yeah. So the anniversary of December 7th, Pearl Harbor, a day not of peace, a day of intense violence. Thank you. That's a good observation. What else? Peace comes to mind.
Security.
Cessation of war.
Security, cessation of war. A good Scrabble word, by the way, cessation. We're familiar with peace. This is a word we know. We hear it all the time. Mia and I say it a lot in our home to our children. Peace, be still. We do. We often hear that peace comes through strength, right? One way we think about this. If our military is the most powerful fighting force, our enemies won't challenge us and we'll have peace, right? I'm stronger than someone else and defend myself. I can have peace because of strength. Taking the opposite approach, some try to keep the peace by avoiding conflict and ignoring problems, hoping they'll solve themselves. Like Israel's false prophets, they provide superficial harmony, saying, peace, peace. But in reality, nobody is truly at peace. The kind of peace that we're talking about, envisioned during Advent, comes not through military victory or avoidance. So it's not strength, it's not avoidance, or not the strength that we think of, but through the way of Jesus. Remember, in the early Christians, that's how they referred to themselves, as the way, right? Because this is what they're seeking to do, is follow the way of Jesus and be like, this is the original WWJD. What would Jesus do? What is Jesus' peace? How is this different? Jesus brings true peace by honestly addressing and working to heal the deeper sources of division, such as fear and pride, that compel people to violence. Jesus reconciles all things to himself, offering healing and restoration through love and forgiveness. And we're actually going to come back to this slide at the end and hang on to that last sentence. As Jesus continues his work of bringing real, lasting peace throughout the earth, we can participate in that work by living as peacemakers. We join with Jesus by embracing his nonviolent way of forgiveness, caring for our neighbors, and extending generous love toward all people. So today our work is to do a couple of things. It's to think deeply about what peace means in our lives and our setting now. It's also to kind of go back, right? So Advent is this season of looking forward and looking back and even looking right now. So we're going to look forward to where we're going with all of this and where we are now. We're also going to look back into the way that our ancestors, the lineage of our faith in the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Hebrew language and the Greek language, how peace was talked about, how the Bible talked about peace. And so these are two words that we are going to explore. Eirene is the Greek for peace. Shalom, probably the more familiar Hebrew word for peace. So let's take a little bit of time and explore these words. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew word for peace is shalom. A greeting, shalom, to you. Many of us think of peace as merely the absence of conflict. But to look at the meaning of this word in its Hebrew form is to understand that the most basic meaning of peace, or shalom, is complete or whole, completeness or wholeness. Before I go too much farther, when we think of peace as just the absence of conflict, to you, does that feel like a complete definition of peace? And why not? Why does that fall short a bit if we say peace is the absence of conflict? Not unfair to say that, but how would you respond to that?
When you were going through this at first, I remember the bumper stickers, give peace a chance.
Mm.
And then I had seen one randomly, give war a chance, but it just kind of seems like it's missing. But what you're hitting here is dealing with what is missed, and then we'll give this. Well, if it's just a matter of give it a chance, but what it.
Right.
Well, and I think the absence of conflict is external, whereas peace is internal, and wholeness and completion.
Peace, our absence of conflict is about an external reality, right? This shalom of peace is this internal, or it's this both and, right? It's the combination of both things being so.
Or in everything we say, we need to be real careful, whether we're talking about out there or in here.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
And
So
it's
there-
easier to create division and conflict when there's turmoil inside, right?
Yeah.
But you project it out.
So if nothing else, we're identifying already there's at least two parts to peace, right? There's the internal and the external. There's the within and there's the outside of.
And I'm just interrupting again. You just made the point that it's not just inside, outside. It's also the outside that's really inside us, but we think for sure it's out there,
Yeah.
It's complicated.
So to talk about shalom, not just talk about peace in the way sometimes we use it in our English setting, but to really talk about shalom in this biblical Hebrew meaning, let's talk about a state of completeness, of wholeness, of completing that which is incomplete, of making well that which is unwell or that which is broken, of repairing, restoring, restoration. These things can refer to a person's well-being, can refer to relationships, right? Communities and systems. So all these things from ourselves, each other, the systems around us, the community, all of it. Think about these concentric circles. The Bible is filled, the spiritual life is filled with concentric circles of things, right? Ourself, and then our neighbors, and then our communities, and the world. So shalom is about all of these things. Life is complex and full of moving parts, and when this breaks down, we have to find ways to take what's missing and restore it. So peace is certainly absence of conflict, but even when there is conflict, as the world we know is full of, peace is about this restoration of that which is already broken, that which continues to break. Great.
Which comes up in Isaiah a lot, right? It's about not just absence of
Continue. No, please continue. Please. I love when this happens. I love it.
For those of you who do not participate in the book club, I highly encourage you.
Yeah.
You can pick it up the third week because it's really good.
Thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt you with that. That is where we're going. Because you're right. The prophet Isaiah is one we're going to pay attention to, who speaks to some of this. But before we even get there, why is there a need to talk for the prophet to prophesy about this coming of the Prince of Peace and the restoration of things? If you go back through the biblical history, right? So we go to Genesis chapter 1 and 2. We have the beginning of all these things, right? So God sets the world in order in a way that God intends. And pretty quickly, what happens? There is this fracturing of the way God intends to what humanity then pursues and chooses. All this, many things from the fall, right? But from this very beginning moment, we have this separation from the way God intends things to the way things are lived and made real. And then, I mean, if you want to spend some time in a difficult place, read the book of Genesis beyond that, right? So we have brothers at the very beginning who murder one another, or one of them murders the other. So right away, we have this brokenness in Scripture, and we get through the stories of the biblical relationships between humanity and God. even the story of Abraham and Abraham's family. So if you go from about Genesis 12 to the end of the book, Genesis 50, it's all about the story of kind of the covenant of Abraham and Abraham's family all the way forward, right? Until you get all the way to kind of a redemption story of family. But throughout that entire story, it's what do we see happening? God saying, do this, follow me. I make this covenant with you. And the people, whether it's Abram or it's his descendants, finding ways to say, no, I'm gonna choose this other way, and things don't go so well. We have to keep following this cycle of brokenness showing up by people choosing a different way than the way God intends, full of restoration, peace, and prosperity in the way that God would offer. So we have stories all across time through the Old Testament and even now. But of God's people following God's way, falling away from it, choosing their own way or the way of someone else, and the world breaking again. You have King David, the man after God's own heart, becoming the second king of Israel, the one who's actually anointed king in a way that's a little more purposeful. And then what happens? It doesn't go so well. It breaks apart. There's bloodshed, and there's deceit, and there's betrayal, and there's lust, and there's all kinds of things that are taking place. And God has to kind of redeem this moment again. There's plenty for the prophet Isaiah to be saying, okay, hang on a second. Let's reshift our focus towards something greater. Isaiah chapter 9, verses 1 through 7. The righteous reign of the coming king. But there will be no gloom for those who were in anguish. In the former time, he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time, he will make glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. You have multiplied exultation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as people exult when dividing plunder. For the yoke of their burden and the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. All the boots of the tramping warriors and all the garments rolled in blood shall be burned as fuel for the fire. For a child has been born for us, a son given to us. Authority rests upon his shoulders, and he is named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Great will be his authority, and there shall be endless peace for the throne of David and his kingdom. He will establish and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time onward and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. I'm aware some of you are singing right now in your head after hearing this, as I am. But what do you hear, if not a piece of music? What do you hear in the text? What do you hear in the prophecy that is here in this prophet's words? What stands out to you?
Hard to analyze that separated from the fact of Christ coming and death.
Yeah.
So looking back on it, it's hard to see where my personal opinion comes from, because my personal opinion is that Christ is coming again, and he's do all these things, and he's going to come through the hearts of Christ followers and use their hands to deliver it.
Sometimes we take for granted that we're on this side of the biblical story, right? We're on post-resurrection side. We're not on the ancient Israel side. We're on that side of the people walking in darkness before the light has shined to begin with, right? And so there is kind of this reminder of what are we bringing into the hearing of this story, right? Versus what's the context of this, where you have, the threat of war. You have these things that are happening all around the context of even this moment before Christ has come to Bethlehem. So yeah, there's an audience here that's different than the audience here. What else do you notice? What else do you hear just in Isaiah's comments?
He will establish and uphold it with justice and with righteousness.
Mm,
So it's not just some strong man barging in and taking over.
Yeah.
It's established with justice and established and uphold it with justice and righteousness.
yeah.
That is part of the peace.
Yeah. You have peace without justice?
No. Reconciliation. South Africa.
Peace, she's
They
talking,
just couldn't do one without the other.
Right.
Part of reconciliation included harm
Yeah.
done to. Sure, just give it up, is what some people. But no, I think it needs to be all maybe preyed upon. P-R-E-Y, that P-R-A-Y, and then there can be that reconciliation that we.
there's a progression that happens. She was talking about peace and reconciliation in South Africa, and just the acknowledgement that part of what has to be a part of that is this acknowledgement of wrongdoing. So like you see in the movement of reconciliation, confession, repentance, forgiveness, reconciliation, restoration.
Some kind of amends.
Yeah. We're going to talk a little about that at the end because there is a distinct difference in some of those things we just named. And it's a part of all of this, right? There's work involved in finding this kind of, there's work involved in justice. There's work involved in doing these kinds of things. But it's very different to think about what does that look like? In fact, in this story, we have Judean King Ahaz, who's a descendant of David, who's under threat and he's concerned. And so there's two ways to go here. There's trust God or trust the Assyrian army, right? And so he chooses the way he knows. So I'm just going to choose the worldly way that I know. And yet again, we see this movement of God's people, or even those who are put in positions of leadership, having an opportunity to say, I'm going to trust God, or I'm going to trust myself, or what I can tangibly grab hold of. And this is a moment being declared, hang on a second. There's something far greater than we can ever grasp or even imagine that is the true bringer of peace, that is for you. So there's this reminder from the prophet Isaiah to pay attention to what God's asking of us. So following this Prince of Peace means refusing to return violence for violence. It means becoming people who embody his reconciling presence in the world. Whenever we overturn injustice and bring healing in place of harm, we are pointing toward his kingdom of peace. There is a way that we are intended to follow, and it's the way of this one who has come and the one who comes. It's tempting to follow a different way that feels more secure. Somebody mentioned security earlier when I said peace, right? That's a complicated word because security to you and security to me are not the same thing. Security that God's talking about is altogether different. So even when we talk about some of the words that we have for this, it becomes objective and distinctly different for all of us. This prophet is saying there is a way. There is the way, and everything else is something else. Isaiah says more about this. I won't read all of this. But this is the peaceful kingdom that is being kind of thought about, kind of in the moving forward of when shalom really happens. Things will happen, will be unlike anything we can expect. Righteousness shall be the belt around his waist, the faithful the belt around his loins. The wolf shall lie shall live with the lamb. The leopard shall lie down with the kid. The calf and the lion will feed together, and a little child shall lead them. Right? This coming kingdom that's something so perplexing we don't even really understand, but it's setting the stage for something we can't comprehend that is unlike anything that will ever happen the same way, which is this Emmanuel coming in a way that is so different than what we can even begin to imagine. And even as you're saying, like for most people, this idea is what's going to come is going to be this conquering hero, right? So that's why, part of the entry into Jerusalem's story at the end of Jesus' life is so particularly meaningful, because rather than come on this stallion with his army, it's palm branches and a colt and donkey, and it's the wrong side of town, and it's a different kind of pomp and circumstance, and it's a peaceful entry, and it's a king of a different kingdom, right? The prophet Isaiah spoke of a future king who would make right what has been broken in this world and bring shalom. Again, not just absence of conflict, but bring this wholeness, this completeness that has been absent from really almost the very beginning of our story. The future king would restore to wholeness the broken relationships between humans and one another, and more deeply, the relationship between humans and their creator. Right, so this is multiple things. This is how do we restore, what are there's three relationships that we are asked to pay attention to: God, self, others. So the relationship with ourselves, relationship with God, the relationship with other people. It's a restoration of all of these things. Isaiah was pointing people forward to a new king, the future prince of shalom, to bring forth a new kingdom, a kingdom of shalom that would not end, one that would make right all wrongs and heal what had been broken. How many of you are familiar with this? A couple of you? So come to my office, which you're welcome to do anytime. It's over there. There's a bowl that looks very much like this one sitting near my desk. And there's a reason for that. Several years ago, I was introduced to the Japanese art of kintsugi. Okay? Kintsugi is an ancient art form that essentially is repairing broken teaware, reassembling these ceramic pieces, usually using some form of gold adhering agent, creating anew this valuable pottery. But in doing so, it becomes something altogether new. It becomes in many ways more beautiful, more significant, more valuable than the original unbroken vessel. I mean, these real pieces of kintsugi art are worth a lot, and they're stunning. But it's taking what is broken and it's repairing it together in a way that makes it new and somehow more significant. For me, this has become a beautiful reflection of what God's trying to do with us and through us in the world. Take what we have broken, what we continue to break, take our lives that are broken, pull them back together on these pieces to say, now, because I've sung a new song over you, put you back together. You are more valuable than you ever were even before. So there's an artist and a writer. His name is Makoto Fujimura, excuse me. He's a Christian and he's a Japanese artist himself. And this is what he says in a book called Art and Faith, which is a really fascinating book. It says, even fixing what is broken is an opportunity to transcend the use of the object. Kintsugi bowls are treasured as objects that surpass their original useful purpose and move into a realm of beauty brought on by the kintsugi master. And so it is with us. Through the fissures of our broken journeys, with pieces of our own hearts shattered on the ground, we journey by God's grace into the new creation. God sees beyond our shattered remains. He picks them up and sings a song over us. This is what shalom is all about. It's about taking that which is broken and restoring it to wholeness in a way that's actually more significant than it was before. What God's been trying to do since the very beginning is what Isaiah's talking about in Christ's coming. And so Christ has come into the world, and now we're in a new place of trying to understand a restoration of brokenness. But we have now this hope that we talked about last week. We have this thing that actually moves us forward to where we can say peace is possible because we have hope of what will come again. So then we get to the New Testament. And we start thinking about peace in a different way because peace is now assigned to a person. Jesus' birth in the New Testament was announced as the arrival of Eirene. Jesus came to offer his peace to others, like when he said to his followers, My peace I give to you all. The apostles claim that Jesus made peace between humans and God when he died and rose from the dead. The idea is that he restored to wholeness the broken relationship between humans and their creator. This is why the apostle Paul can say Jesus himself is our eirene. He was the whole, complete human that I am made to be, but have failed to be. Now he gives me his life as a gift. And this means that Jesus' followers are now called to create peace. We have a calling now. So now peace is not just this prophesied idea of what is to come. It's now been manifest and made real. It is now Emmanuel with us. It can be assigned to a way of being, a way of living. That's the way of Jesus. And now Jesus has gone to where we have not yet able to go, but is left with us. What does it say? I'll leave with you an advocate. The spirit of peace is left with us. So we have this ability to become peacemakers, right? So we get into the New Testament letters. Paul starts writing about the fullness of God in him was pleased to dwell, and through him God was pleased to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, by making peace through the blood of his cross. The act of resurrection is taking that which is separate and trying to bring it back together, restore this whole world. But to say to us, as we've said in here before, there's no longer this separation of ourselves and God's presence and God's purpose. Now, through the acts of the Spirit, we are God's presence in the world, which means if Christ is peace and we've been given Christ within us, then we ought to be peace ourselves. An if and equation, right? Or if then, I should say. Jesus himself is our eirene. Ephesians chapter 2. For he is our peace. In his flesh, he has made both into one and has broken down the dividing wall, that is the hostility between us, abolishing the law with its commandments and ordinances, that he might create in himself one new humanity in place of the two, thus making peace. And might reconcile both to God in one body through the cross, thus putting to death that hostility through it. Anybody know the context of what the Ephesians are going through that Paul is writing to them about? It's one thing to hear this and just think, oh, that sounds good. Like we'll have peace, but stop having hostility. You might know the larger context of the letter to the Ephesians here. It's okay if you don't. There was this division that the early church in Ephesus was setting up falsely. Was to say either you're in or you're out. Because either you're circumcised or you're uncircumcised. Either you were Jew or you were Gentile. Right? So there's this clear, they were trying to set this division of who gets to be a part of God's kingdom, who gets to be accepted. And we're saying, all right, let's create this division in a very clear way. And Paul sees this and says, guys, we're missing the point completely here. And so we get the letter that says neither Jew nor Gentile, slave or free, all of these doesn't matter. We don't get to determine who's a recipient of the Prince of Peace's righteous kingdom. It's not about setting up divisions. It's saying, no. Or abolish some of these things. So we might create in himself one new humanity in place of the two. Rather than these two things, we're making peace and might reconcile both to God in one body through the cross, putting to death the hostility through it. Paul is instructing local churches to keep their unity, not uniformity, but unity through the bond of peace, which requires a few things: humility, patience, bearing with others in love. I beg you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, making every effort to maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. Not easy to be humble, by the way, right? You're like a humble professional, patient. Everybody patient all the time?
Buddy.
Yeah. Bearing with others in love sounds easy enough, but what about people you hate? Well, somebody's hurt you. Somebody you don't know. Becoming people of peace means participating in the life of Jesus, who reconciled all things in heaven and earth, restoring peace through his death and resurrection. It's about a way of being. It's about walking a path that is our life of engagement with ourselves, with others, with God. That's made possible through the peacemaker, the one who came and brought peace to this world to begin with. But the problem is it's not easy. Otherwise, we'd have it all figured out by now. But pay attention. The world is not all figured out, right? Where is there peace? It's hard to find. And this is a pretty peaceful room. Thank you. But man, it's hard to navigate. So we're going to go back to what we said at the beginning. We're going to spend our last few moments talking about a particular way that we do this in the world. Because this is, some of these ideas are pretty abstract, right? We can just think, okay, be peaceful, right? Have justice and God's righteousness, and be humble and love each other and be patient. First of all, those are ideas, and second of all, they're really hard to do. Going back to those slides from the beginning, the kind of peace envisioned during Advent, this shalom, that speaks to the work of Jesus as eirene, this peace, the one who brings peace. That kind of peace during Advent comes not through military victory or avoidance of reality, right? We've said this already, but through the way of Jesus. Jesus brings true peace by honestly addressing and working to heal the deeper sources of division. So Paul's letter is part of that, trying to point to division such as fear and pride that compel people to violence. How much is fear a driving force of the opposite of peace? Jesus reconciles all things to himself, offering healing and restoration through love and forgiveness. Let me ask you this question. What's the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation? We were talking about this earlier. I think this is an important part of this conversation. But what would you say, if you might, and then I can offer, but what is the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation? Are they the same thing?
If
If
you're
they're
betrayed by your friend, you can forgive him, but that doesn't mean you're going to dinner.
Okay.
Forgiveness is one-sided, reconciliation is two.
She knows the teacher pretty well. She's also very smart. Forgiveness is one-sided. I can forgive you without you doing anything. You don't even have to know about it. I can say, Daniel, I forgive you. And you don't have to be in the room. But there's still something left there. There's still this, but there's still oftentimes a division that remains. Maybe I forgive you, but you don't necessarily want anything to do with me. I don't know what to do, but I'm going to forgive you.
Like the piece of pottery, sometimes there isn't enough gold. Mend it together, right?
Sometimes
there isn't. And
sometimes
that's
there's not.
all you can go with is the forgiveness side.
Right.
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 And that's a personal thing.
The other side is when there is enough for all the pieces to come together, for both sides to say, not only do I forgive you, but I want to work through this to where we have wholeness between us again. Let's reconcile these things that we are in some ways better and stronger than we were before, right? Reconciliation takes both people saying, we're going to do this together. We're both going to acknowledge, and there's some acceptance of wrongdoing, right? We named that earlier. There's some embracing of healing needed and willingness to walk this together. So shalom is not just about forgiveness, right? Because that's just one way to say, somebody once explained to me, forgiveness is releasing the other person from the expectation that they can fix what they did. There's a release there. I'm just going to release you from that. That's good. That's a first step there. Somebody else said this way, that part of the problem with not forgiving is that when we are holding something against someone, we're keeping them in prison, but we have to be the prison guard. So we can release that. But that's only the first step. This shalom we're talking about is restoring from brokenness back to wholeness, making complete that which is incomplete. Yeah.
So the justice component that we spoke of earlier, if there's a right that was wrong, then you don't correct that right or deal with it,
Right.
then it's not, I think that's the two-sided part of it. And
Yeah.
just going back to like what happened in South Africa, and I would say what has not happened in North America, due primarily to North American churches not doing their part to correct what our own, but wanting the benefits of it without doing the work.
Yeah.
Well, I do a whole bunch of jigsaw puzzles. And I bring my little piece to the jigsaw puzzle. Interesting that they call it piece.
Yeah.
I put my piece next to somebody else's piece.
Yeah.
Hmm.
There's imagery of this if you just pay attention. I'm gonna use this in just a few minutes, so forgive me but the Raleigh Youth Choir is here today, and they're gonna sing a song at the very beginning called "Where the Light Begins," and it's a text from Jan Richardson. Which, if you've never read Jan Richardson's work or seen her artwork, please do. But it says, if I can get this right, I have it right here. Perhaps it takes a lifetime to open our eyes to learn to see what has forever shimmered in front of us. It's there. Prince of Peace has come. Peace is available. It's learning to see differently, learning to see ourselves differently, one another differently, learning to see situations and circumstances and problems and systems and structures differently. And perhaps it takes a lifetime to open our eyes and learn to see that way. But when we do, we can start seeing where there's the different pieces that I have and you have, and we put together, and then the reconciliation about creating the full picture that was intended all along. And so when we talk about this, not just about forgiveness, it's about what happens and what forgiveness makes possible. So the light of the world came into this world and then gave his life for us to forgive us, so that wasn't the end of the story, by the way. It wasn't just Jesus died and we're forgiven and the end. So that we can do this now, this work. We can be peacemakers. As Jesus continues his work of bringing real, lasting peace throughout the earth, we can participate in that work by living as peacemakers. We join with Jesus by embracing his nonviolent way of forgiveness, caring for our neighbors, and extending generous love toward all people. Gospel of Matthew. Blessed are the peacemakers. That's not somebody else. That's us. It's meant to be. So as we go through this week, as we engage in this conversation more fully, pay attention to what peace means in your life, where you felt it, where it feels absent, what it means to be a peacemaker, how you're supposed to be engaged with it, what the biblical story has taught us about waiting for peace, observing peace, following the way of peace. That's what Advent does for us. It's not just light a candle and say peace and think, all is well. Work that we've got to do. Comments, reflections, questions, clarifications, pronunciations, which I'll get wrong. It's a great word.
As you're saying all this, I'm reflecting on the Christian environment in which the civil rights movement took place. Bodies so much of what you're talking about here, and I think frequently about what a glorious gift to this country it was that we had a civil rights movement that was inspired by people of deep faith who were approaching this issue in the kind of way.
A movement that was intended to be, anyway, nonviolent, right? About equality, about this kind of leveling of things. I mean, equity, certainly, about reconciliation of things that had been badly broken and continue to be. I mean, it was led in large part by a preacher of the gospel of Jesus Christ, by a minister who tried to live into these things. I mean, he was a person, a human who struggled with this stuff. But the principles of that were founded in this stuff we're talking about, right? And thank God that we had that. We still have work to do, but you know, that's part of what that looks like, right? This is hard work. What else would you say or comment on or reflect on our question?
Maybe working toward peace is sort of like whack-a-mole. You know, in, personally, I mean, I might feel comfortable with where I am about my money or my relationship with my wife, but then there's other things in my life, you know, my relationship with somebody else or some other part of my life that's a flare up. So I deal with that. Boom.
Right.
It's also like that when it's external, you know, there's a war over here, there's
Right.
economic problems over there. Everyone whacks it, but something else comes up.
I think one of the challenges,
But the bottom line is it's work. You have to work at it.
it is. I think one of the challenges you're pointing out though is it's an ongoing work, right? It's that this thing, I can get this figured out over here, and then suddenly, boom. Or I'm trying to take care of peace in my area, but look what they're doing over there. I'm not over. I'm not over there. So what's the song? Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. So you start where you are, right? I mean, there's all we can do is just let peace begin with me, where I am, and hope that the centrifugal force of that, the movement of that outward, has an impact. But yeah, it's let me get this taken care of over here, only to find out, boom, something else. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
We might not finish the race, but we're not free to abandon it. That's what
Well said, Harry.
So,
We may not finish the race, but we're not free to just abandon it altogether. Or we may not know where the finish line is. So we may feel like, well, I might as well just give up. Is hopeful? Is there hope in this?
Yes, not, for me today, the future hope is, the future peace is not easy to grasp for me.
Yeah.
But the take home for me is peace came.
Yeah.
Peace isn't to come, it's not something, it's not an abstract theological concept. So I can
Yeah.
try to wrap around all my inner conflicts.
Yeah. I mean, thank God, literally, we're an Easter people, right? We're on the other side of that. The hope has already come. Peace has already come.
In Jesus coming at birth,
Yeah.
that peace is here.
Yeah. Emmanuel, God with us. Yeah, so I hope that this is not easy, and that there's plenty of places for despair when you start talking about peace. You start inevitably paying attention to where it's absent more than anything else, right? But the biblical story is that God always redeems, saves, comes through. And that's true for us too. So let us close where we are. I've got to get to presiding duties, but any last comments or questions before we go and give our attention to peace this week, and then we turn our attention next week to joy? Well, peace be with you. Thank you for being here today, and we'll see you next week. Go in peace.
Thank you.